Hi, my name is Victor Grillon, and I'm here to explain to you a little bit about the financial crisis, otherwise known as the credit crisis or subprime mortgage crisis. And I'm going to go into more detail of who were the winners and who were the losers of the credit crisis. So essentially, who came out on top and who lost everything. Now, before I begin, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what the financial crisis was and how it occurred. So, as you all may know, our country endured one of the toughest financial hardships it's endured since the Great Depression in the 20s and 30s. And this happened about 6 or 7 years ago. The reason this occurred would be due to this: relaxed loan qualifications. And the fact that financial institutions and banks lowered their qualifications or regulations to allow people with, essentially people with poor credit and low income to qualify for mortgages that they couldn't ultimately afford. So what happened was they would qualify these these mortgage borrowers to qualify for a mortgage that they couldn't afford. And on top of that, these mortgages had an adjustable interest rate. So when interest rates rose, the borrowers could no longer pay their mortgages, essentially taking them into default, foreclosure, and short selling. So this is what happened with the housing bubble and how it bursted. If you all recall, in 2005, 2006, the housing market was at its peak. It was at its highest. Prices were absurdly high. You know, houses were being bought left and right. But this was a bad thing, because houses were being bought left and right with mortgages that I would call unqualified. People did not qualify to have these mortgages. And as a result, when they defaulted on these mortgages, the housing bubble bursted. It's going to take me to my next point: the current winners of the credit crisis. Now, who came out on top? Now, a lot of you may be saying, didn't we all lose? I lost, we lost, you know, our country as a whole endured one of its toughest financial hardships. But believe it or not, there were a few winners who reaped the benefits, few benefits that the financial crisis brought. Some of these winners were big banks. Winners such as JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, for instance. Now, here you have winners, big banks, but I like to call them lucky big banks. Because the only reason, as you see here in the next slide, the only reason that these big banks were able to stay strong and be considered winners were because they received bailout money. The federal government created a program called TARP. Now, TARP was used to essentially purchase assets from these financial institutions. Instead, it was used to buy stocks from these financial institutions and banks, ultimately increasing the value of their stocks and strengthening them as an institution. So they, instead of defaulting or becoming weaker and going bankrupt, they got stronger. Another winner of the financial crisis are short investors. Short investors are pretty much knowledgeable investors, those who were able to predict the crisis, and they were able to sell short before the housing bubble bursted and before they were on the back end of the crisis. Another investors, hedge fund managers and private equity veterans such as George Soros, Andrew Lott. These were individuals who were able to reap the benefits again from the financial crisis. Here you see second highest hedge fund earner in 2007. So even while most of the country was going through some financial hardship, a country as a whole was going through an economic downturn, these individuals were able to come out on top. Pete and Steve Schwarzman, part of the Blackstone Group, arguably one of the strongest financial, real estate investment firms in the world, and continues to be today. And what do we have here? Mr. Warren Buffett, only the most knowledgeable stock investor that has ever lived, in my opinion, was able to predict what was going on and invested in companies at 2008 lows, which essentially made him billions. Already a billionaire, making more billions. Winners, the government. As I mentioned before in the first slide with the winners, the government created a program called TARP. As I said before, they, instead of purchasing assets from the financial institutions, they invested in these banks and financial institutions by purchasing their stocks, ultimately increasing the value of the company and strengthening them. Another winner of the financial crisis are bond investors. And through basic economics, we know that when the economy goes down, the government intends to sell their bonds to strengthen the dollar. So those who invested in bonds heavily were able to come out winning. And that closes section for winners of the financial crisis. Short and sweet, but those who won big time. Now we're going to go into the current losers of the credit crisis. Those who lost. And a lot of you may be saying, raising your hand, saying, that's me, that's me, that's me. And unfortunately, 80% of subprime borrowers were given adjustable rate mortgages. And out of those 80%, I say 60 to 70% defaulted on their mortgages. The reason being is because these financial institutions allowed them to acquire these mortgages that they could not essentially afford, along with an adjustable rate, interest rate. When interest rates rose, they had to default. They had no way of paying their monthly payments and ultimately foreclosed or went underwater on their homes, which brought the birth of short selling. Short selling is when a mortgage lender allows the homeowner to sell the property short of their what they owe the bank. So for instance, if they owe the bank $300, they allow the consumer to sell their house at $250, and ultimately the bank takes the hit. Another loser were banks and other financial institutions. You may remember in the first couple of slides, banks and financial institutions were also winners, but not all of them were. Only the ones that got bailed out. And as you see here, most popular, Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers took a big hit and ended up going into bankruptcy because they were not given a bailout. So they weren't saved, essentially. They weren't lucky. They weren't the lucky ones. They ended up losing billions. Another loser of the financial crisis are insurance companies such as AIG. AIG took a big hit during the crisis, ultimately feeding into their downfall. You have another loser here, credit rating agencies. Credit rating agencies took also a big hit, along with everyone else. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We all know Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Strongest insurers of mortgage debt. They're the ones that pretty much were in control of the mortgage industry as far as how much money was being given to smaller banks and smaller financial institutions to lend mortgages to the consumer. So they were in control of that. So they were essentially giving a surplus of money to these financial institutions and allowing them to make these absurd mortgages for subprime borrowers. So at the end of the day, they ended up taking a huge hit. Here we have CDO investors. CDO investors also took a very big hit, and they had to sell to hedge funds at the end of the day. Money managers such as Harvard Management Company, a lot of you may know it as the world's largest endowment fund, lost more than $10 billion in 2008. Now that's a lot of money right there. Savers and pension funds. A lot of us with pension funds had money taken away, lost our money through the pension funds. Unfortunately, another loser was the economists and intellectuals. You go on and on. You can go on and on down the list of losers. And with that being said, this ultimately affected the labor market. Here in the next slide, you see how the labor market was affected. Now, because companies went into default and started losing a lot of money, they could not afford to pay the salaries of their employees no longer. So there were a lot of budget cuts, there were a lot of layoffs, and the unemployment rate skyrocketed from there on. As well as college graduates who were graduating with a bachelor's degree, some even with a master's. Took them 2 to 3 years to find their first job in the industry they were seeking. You have low-skilled workers having to go back to school to be competitive in the job market once again. All the workers were not able to retire. You had people working at companies that were 60, 70 years old, not able to retire only because they did not have the money to retire. And biggest loser, taxpayers. Pretty much all of us in the United States. We pretty much got stuck with the bill. So, like I said before, basic economic show, as the country goes downhill, who are the ones that bring it back up? The taxpayers, the citizens, the workers. So we pretty much got stuck with the bill, for lack of other terms. And predictions. As I close with the losers of the financial crisis, we go into predictions. What happened, what can happen in the future, what will happen as far as the housing market, financial institutions, and whatnot. But to start off, we'll talk predictions of future winners, housing, and investors. So those who were able to buy properties when the market was at its lowest, after, let's say, after the peak of 2005 into 2006, the housing market dumped. It dropped, it went down to its lowest, and those who were able to buy properties at the lowest in 2008, for instance, are going to reap the benefits within the next few years. As the market increases and the market progresses, the housing value also increases. So those who were able to purchase a home for $50,000 in 2008, early 2008, might be able to reap the benefits of selling their home for $250,000 in the next few years or this year. I've seen it happen before. Interest rates will eventually rise, which will favor savers as well. Banks will learn from crisis and emerge stronger. You know, you learn from your mistakes. So banks, after going through what they went through 6-7 years ago, they pretty much were able to turn around and figure out what went wrong, and are now fixing that and becoming stronger institutions and more regulated. A lot more regulations has come from that. Taxpayers will see a tax hike to pay for deficits. That tax money will go to public spending projects until public financings are fixed. Problem could potentially carry on for generations. So this is a prediction of what the taxpayers are going to endure for the next few years. You know, we have to, as I said before, as a country, the only ones who bring the country back up and stabilize the economy are the citizens, or otherwise the taxpayers. So we are the ones that are going to be, we are the only ones that will be able to bring the economy back to where it needs to be. And the way we do this is, unfortunately, by paying higher taxes and having the money go elsewhere than public investments. And in conclusion, widespread failures in financial almost led to the collapse of financial markets. Nearly led to the collapse of financial markets. You know, financial markets almost went downhill from there. Financial crisis, as I said in the beginning, almost close to what happened in the 20s and 30s, the Great Depression. We hadn't seen or experienced something like that in a long, long time. And it really hit us hard when it hit us in 2006 and 2007. And that will conclude my presentation for subprime mortgage crisis. I hope you've gained a wealth of knowledge as to how it happened, why it happened, and most of all, who were the winners and who were the losers. Thank you.